Okay, good day everyone. So I will be presenting about the hypothesis testing. Okay, so hypothesis testing is a type of statistical analysis that involves the process of determining specific results in reference to a various statistical values and statistical measures. Hypothesis testing differs in terms of every type of research and for every statistical treatment to be used. Okay, so we do the hypothesis testing in quantitative research. Okay, kasi meron tayong dalawang hypotheses and those are the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. And we will be talking about those two hypotheses later. Now, hypothesis is an assumption or a proposed statement regarding a possible answer to a research problem or question. Okay, to test the hypothesis, a research must be converted into a statistical hypothesis. Okay, so in quantitative research, so just like what I have said, we have hypotheses. So yung hypothesis, it is an educated guess. Yan, educated guess kasi um, ina-assume natin yung possible outcome ng research natin. Okay, whether it will happen or not, whether it has difference or wala, whether it has relationship or wala. So yun yung hypothesis na sinasabi, yung haka-haka nga kung tawagin sa Tagalog. Okay? Now, let's talk about the steps on how to conduct a hypothesis testing. Okay? So, the first step is to state the null and alternative hypotheses. Okay, ito yung sinabi ko na there are two types of hypotheses. So, the first one is null hypothesis. It is a general statement that states that there is no relationship between two phenomenon under consideration or that there is no association between two groups. Okay, so for null hypothesis, parang it talks about the negative, di ba? Negative result ng inyong research. So, if you are looking for the relationship or if you are relationship of two variables, so when you are stating null hypothesis, you are going to say that there is no significant relationship between your variables. So, yun, there is no. So, sa null hypothesis, lagi kayong may mababasang no significant relationship, no significant differences. So, yun yung null hypothesis. Now, dito naman sa alternative hypothesis, it is a statement that describes that there is a relationship between two selected variables in a study. So, yung alternative hypothesis, it is opposite ng null hypothesis. Kasi sa alternative hypothesis, ito yung haka-haka ninyo that your research or um, that your variables have relationship with each other. So, yun yung alternative hypothesis. Kung yung null hypothesis, ang ina-assume natin na walang relationship yung mga variables, walang differences. Dito naman sa alternative hypothesis, ina-assume natin, okay, na may relationship or may differences yung bawat variables. But then, hindi pa natin siya kine-claim as a statement. Kaya nga siya hypothesis, di ba? Parang um, assumption lang natin sa magiging result ng research natin. So, yun yung dalawang kailangan meron sa quantitative research. Okay? And that is the first step kung paano tayo makakapag-test ng hypothesis. Okay, again, the first step is to state or conduct um, the hypothesis or state the hypothesis of your research. Okay, those are the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So, this is the symbol for the null hypothesis and this is the symbol for alternative hypothesis. Now, let's go to the step 2. Ayan. For the step 2, set a level of significance. So, yung set of level of significance, yung level of significance natin, ito yon, possible na 0.01, 0.05, and 0.1. But then, madalas natin gagamitin yung 0.05. Okay? Ito yung ating margin of error kung tawagin. And also yung level of significance. So, huwag kayong malilito sa margin of error and level of significance. So, 0.05. So don't worry, it is already given na. It's up to you kung ano yung gagamitin ninyo. Okay, but then we advise everyone that we have to use 0.05 as our level of significance. Okay, and then after that, the step 3. Okay, number 3, we have to compute for the p-value for each given statistical treatment. So itong p-value na sinasabi dito, ito yung um, last last module ninyo, if you can still remember the Pearson R and chi-square. So yun. Okay, whether you're looking for the differences in correlation, 'di ba? For example, Pearson R yung ginamit ninyong formula. So yung value doon or yung computed value doon, yun yung p-value natin. And if chi-square naman, yung computed value din doon ay yun yung p-value natin. Okay? Then after the third step is we have the fourth one. Okay? Using the statistical table of values, determine the critical value to be compared in the statistical p-value. Okay, so meron tayong statistical table of values kasi. Since we are talking about two formulas or two hypothesis testing technique, 'di ba? Statistical technique, and those are the Pearson R and chi-square. So sa Pearson R, meron tayong specific na table para sa Pearson R lang. Sa chi-square, may isang table lang din para sa chi-square. And then, number 5, write the specific decision rule. Okay? So, ito yung decision rule natin. If p value or the computed value is greater than the critical value, then reject. This is null hypothesis. Okay? If p value is less than critical value, then we are fail to reject null hypothesis. Okay? So, huwag tayong malilito dito. Ito yung ating decision rule. So, makikita nyo mamaya yung detailed information about itong mga dito sa mga rules na to. Next, number 6 is make a decision and state the results. Ayan. So, those are the steps in conducting hypothesis testing. Okay? So, huwag kayong malilito sa p-value, sa critical value, sa computed value. Yan. Yun yung may encounter ninyo na terms during this hypothesis testing. Now, in hypothesis testing or the rules for Pearson R, the hypothetical rule for Pearson R, tandaan nito, if the computed value is greater than the critical value, okay, we have to reject this is null hypothesis. And to get the degrees of freedom for the Pearson R, ito yung degrees of freedom kasi bago natin makuha yung critical value, kailangan muna natin computein yung degrees of freedom. But then usually, doon sa activity ninyo, given naman yun. Okay? So, ito yung formula for the Pearson R when we are looking for the degrees of freedom. So, ano ba yung N? Yung N, yun yung total number. Okay? Total number. Ayan. Now, dito naman sa chi-square, we have rules for chi-square. So, if the computed value is greater than the critical value, we have to reject the null hypothesis. Okay. So, yung critical value natin, makikita natin yun based doon sa degrees of freedom natin. And we will see that later. Now, to get the degrees of freedom for chi-square, ayan, for example, chi-square yung ginamit ninyong formula, okay? Para makuha natin yung degrees of freedom, ito yung formula natin. Degrees of freedom is equal to C, means column, minus 1, multiply by R. Ang ibig sabihin ng R ay rows, minus 1. Okay, this is the formula for chi-square when you are about to look for the degrees of freedom. Now, ito yung mga table na sinasabi ko. So, this table is just for the Pearson R. Okay? So, ito yung degrees of freedom. So, for example, nakuha natin ay 7 yung degrees of freedom natin. And then, yung ating margin of error na ginamit ay 0.05. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, ito, ayan, 0.666. So, ito yung ating critical value. So, makikita natin yon later. Now, dito naman sa table 4, table of values for chi-square. So ganun lang din. So for example, yung degrees of freedom natin ay 1 and yung ating margin of error na ginamit ay 0.05. Yung ating critical value ay ito, 3.841, 841. Okay. Now let's try it. Let's see how to compute or how to do the hypothesis testing. So, meron tayong sample problem for Pearson R. So, we have to conduct a hypothesis testing for the correlation between the mathematical skills and the research skills of grade 12 students. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, ang ating research ay about sa pagkuha or makukuha natin dapat yung level of correlation between the mathematical skills and research skills. And then, the R value is 0.75 or 0.75. The R value or P value. So, ito yung computed value na sinasabi. Yan, yung 0.75 in a margin of error of 0.05. So, yung margin of error given na sa problem. And with 10 samples. So, ito yung N na sinasabi ko. Okay, total number of respondents. So, ito, 10. Okay, let's be aware with these numbers. Again, 0.75 is the p-value or the computed value, and 0.05 is our margin of error, and then 10, ito yung n. Okay, ito yung total number of samples. Okay, now let's look the steps again. So the first step is to state the null and alternative hypothesis. Okay, there are two types of hypothesis. Hindi tayo pwedeng isa lang. Hindi pwedeng isa lang yung gawin nating hypothesis. Kailangan dalawa. Kasi itetest natin tong mga hypothesis natin kung alin yung i-accept natin based doon sa result na makukuha natin. Now, how are we going to write hypothesis? So, pwedeng ganito. So, since we are looking for the correlation, so yung assumption natin for the null hypothesis is mathematical skills and research skills has no significant correlation. So for alternative naman, mathematical skills and research skills has significant correlations. Or pwede rin gawin natin or sabihin ninyo sa inyong null hypothesis is there is no significant correlation between mathematical skills and research skills. And dito naman sa alternative natin, there is significant correlation between mathematical skills and research skills. So, pwedeng ganun yung constructions. But then, let's see na lang muna or let's look na lang muna dito sa ating example hypothesis. Okay, again, the step 1 is to state the null and alternative hypothesis. So, ito na yon. Next, number 2, set a level of significance. Okay, yung level of significance natin, ito, 0.05. So, huwag kayong mako-confused. Yung level of significance and margin of error ay iisa lang. Okay? Again, level of significance and margin of error ay iisa lang. Okay? So, for this research, yung ating level of significance is 0.05. So, saan nakuha tong 0.05? It is already given. So, ito siya. Nasa sample problem na siya. Then, the third one is compute for p-value. Okay. So, since hindi na natin kailangan computein yung p-value dun sa ating sample problem kasi given na siya, ayan, it should be p-value 0.75 or ito yung computed value. Again, p-value and computed value ay okay, iisa lang. Ayan. So, based on the given problem, again, 0.75 is our computed value. Next, fourth step is using statistical table of values, determine the critical value to be compared in statistical p-value. Okay, so yung p-value natin or computed value natin is 0.75. Now, mayroon tayong i-compare sa kanya para malaman natin kung i-reject natin yung null hypothesis or i-accept natin yung null hypothesis. So, tandaan ninyo, 0.75 yung ating computed value. Okay. But then, paano natin makukuha yung critical value na hinahanap na i-compare natin dito sa 0.75? So, mahahanap natin yon through looking for the degrees of freedom. Okay? For the degrees of freedom. So, degrees of freedom, ito yun. Degrees of freedom is equal to n minus 2. Yung n, ito yung sinasabi ko, ito yung n natin, yung 10. Okay? So, ito yung solution niya. Degrees of freedom is equal to 10 minus 2. 10, again, saan siya nakuha? Dito sa problem natin. 10 samples or total number of respondents or total number of samples. Now, 10 minus 2 is equal to 8. Okay. So, hindi pa to yung critical value natin. Okay? Kung yung ating degrees of freedom ay 8, ayan, based on the table of values considering the degrees of freedom, the critical value is 0.632. Okay? So, saan nakuha tong 0.632 na to? Again, kapag nakuha nyo na yung degrees of freedom, okay, degrees of freedom, titingin muna tayo sa table. Okay, bago tayo pumunta sa rule number 5 and rule number 6. Okay? Again, andito pa lang tayo sa rule number 4. Okay, degrees of freedom natin ay 8. And then hahanapin natin yung critical value ng 8. So ito, ganito siya. Titingin tayo sa table. Okay, since our degrees of freedom is 8, so ayan, dito tayo titingin. And then, since our margin of error or level of significance ay 0.05, ayan, 0.05. So, titingnan natin kung saan matatapat yon. Ibig sabihin, yung ating critical value ngayon ay 0.632. Okay, 0.632 or 0.632. So, that is our critical value. Now, kung may critical value na tayo, i-compare na natin yon doon sa ating computed value. And ano ba yung computed value natin? Ayan, let's look for rule number 5. We have to write the specific decision rule. Okay, yung 0.632, ito yung ating critical value na nakuha natin dito. Ayan, nakuha natin dyan. And then, i-compare natin siya sa computed value. Okay? Kung nalilito kayo kung nasaan yung computed value or kung saan galing yung computed value, dito siya galing. Okay, babalikan ko lang. Ayan, yung p-value natin or yung computed value, it is already given doon sa activity ninyo. Given na siya doon. Okay, computed value, p-value, or r-value. So, yun. Okay, i-compare natin yun doon sa ating critical value. Now, let's go back to the rule number 5. Ayan. Write the specific decision rule. So, yung 0.75 na ating computed value is greater than our critical value and yung critical value natin is 0.632. Okay, now ano ba yung rule kapag daw greater yung ating computed value? So, this is the hypothetical rule for Pearson R. Okay? If the computed value is greater than the critical value, we have to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, so kung babalikan natin tong nasa box na blue, 0.75 is greater than 0.632. So meaning to say, our computed value is greater than the critical value. 'Di ba? Mas malaki yung 75 sa 632 or 0.75 sa 0.632. So, ibig sabihin, ire-reject natin yung null hypothesis. So, balikan natin yung mga hypothesis natin, yung null and alternative. So, ito yung null. Mathematical skills and research skills has no significant correlation. And for the alternative, mathematical skills and research skills has significant correlation. Okay. So, ang sabi, ire-reject daw natin yung null hypothesis. So, ibig sabihin, kapag reject, hindi na yon yung ating hypothesis or hindi na yon yung i-accept natin. So, meaning to say, yung result ng research natin is yung alternative. Okay? Ibig sabihin, hindi na natin papansinin yung null hypothesis kasi yun yung nasa rule eh. Kapag daw yung computed value natin ay mas mataas kaysa doon sa critical value, ire-reject na natin yung null hypothesis. So, ibig sabihin, ang result ng ating hypothesis testing is yung mathematical skills and research skills has significant correlations. Now, kung i-state natin yon as the conclusion for our hypothesis, ito siya. There is a significant correlation between the mathematical skills and the research skills of grade 12 students. Okay? So, yun yung pagtetest kapag Pearson R ang ginagamit. Okay? Or kapag Pearson R yung tinetest natin. Okay, okay. Tandaan ninyo, sa Pearson R, yung ating formula, babalikan ko lang, yung formula nyo sa pagkuha ng degrees of freedom ay ito. Okay? This is for the Pearson R. Alright? Now, next, let's move to the chi-square naman. Sa chi-square, kung paano mag-compute ng chi-square, same lang din naman. Okay? Let's read the problem. Conduct hypothesis testing for differences of mathematical skills of grade 12 students based on their ages. The chi-square value is 14.32 in a margin of error of 0.05 with 10 samples. Okay, so let's observe muna tong problem. Okay, yung chi-square value, ito yung ating tinatawag na p-value. Ito rin yung tinatawag natin na computed value, yung 14.32. And then yung margin of error natin is 0.05. Okay, 0.05, ito yung gagamitin natin sa pagtingin dun sa table mamaya para makuha natin yung critical value. And then yung 10, yan, itong 10, ito yung n or total number of respondents or total number of samples, yung 10. Now, meron tayong scales dito kasi nga chi-square yung ginamit natin. So, dun sa Pearson R, wala tayong ganitong scales and categories. Okay? Kung matatandaan ninyo doon sa chi-square niyo sa computation, meron kayong scales or meron kayong categories na tinitingnan doon, di ba? Now, let's go back here. Based on the given problem, 14.32 is the computed value. Ayan. Now, balik tayo doon sa mga steps. Okay, the first step is to state the null and alternative hypothesis. Okay, so yung null and alternative natin for this problem is that there are no significant differences among the mathematical skills of grade 12 students based on their ages. And for the alternative, there are significant differences among the mathematical skills of grade 12 students based on their ages. Okay. So, ayun, na-state na natin yung ating mga hypothesis, yung null and alternative. Okay, saan natin siya kinuha dito? Sa ating problem. Since we are looking for the differences. Now, for the step 2, we have to set for a level of significance. Okay, again, just like what I have said, yung margin of error natin at yung level of significance ay iisa lang po. Okay, so based on the problem, our margin of error is 0.75. Therefore, our level of significance is 0.05 then. Okay, and then number 3, compute for the p-value for each given statistical treatment. Okay, itong p-value natin, it is already given. Ayan, ito yung resulta sa chi-square or sa Pearson R. But then we are talking for chi-square. Now let's go back to our problem. The chi-square value is 14.32. Okay? So ibig sabihin, ito yung ating p-value or yung computed value. Ayan, ito nga, di ba? Based on the given problem, 14.32 is the computed value. So ito yung ating computed value. Ayan. So again, babalikan ko, ito yung hypothesis natin, null and alternative. Ito yung level of significance natin or yung margin of error, 0.75. 0.05. Okay, that is our margin of error or level of significance. And then for the computed value, we have 14.32. Now, let's go to the step 4. Ayan, sa step 4, using the statistical table of values, ayan, determine the critical value to be compared in the statistical value or statistical p-value. Okay, ang sabi dito sa step 4 daw ay hahanapin natin yung critical value na i-compare natin doon sa p-value or doon sa computed value natin. But then, paano natin makukuha yung critical value? Again, para makuha ang critical value, kailangan muna natin na hanapin yung degrees of freedom. Okay, degrees of freedom. Ayan. So, dito naman sa chi-square, okay, chi-square na tayo, iba yung formula niya sa degrees of freedom. Okay, ito yung formula for the chi-square. So, degrees of freedom is equal to C Ito yung C, ibig sabihin niya na ay column. Ayan, minus 1 times R, row, minus 1. Okay. So, saan natin nakuha yung 3? Ayan, total number of skills kasi natin ay 3. And the total number of categories natin or yung rows natin ay 3 din. Okay, babalikan ko lang yung previous page. So, ito siya. So, ito yung scale kasi natin or yung column. So, we have 3. 1, 2, 3. Diba? So, for the categories naman or yung total number ng rows natin ay ito, 17 to 18, 1. 19 to 20, 2. 21 to 22, 3. So, tig 3 tayo. Okay, now let's go back to number 4. Okay, so ito na. Let's put it in an equation. Or df or degrees of freedom is equal to, and here is our formula, and ito na 2 kasi 3 minus 1 is 2, di ba? 3 minus 1 is 2, so 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so yung degrees of freedom natin ay 4. Okay, again, yung critical value natin, malalaman lang natin siya kapag nakuha na natin yung ating degrees of freedom. Okay? So, yung degrees of freedom natin ay 4. Now, sabi dito, based on the table of values, considering the degrees of freedom that is 4, the critical value is 9.488. Okay, so saan ulit nakuha itong 9.488? Okay, so again, titingin tayo sa table, pero hindi tayo titingin doon sa table na pinakita ko kanina. Kasi yung chi-square, meron siyang sariling table for table of values. Okay, tandaan ninyo, yung degrees of freedom natin ngayon ay 4. Now, let's see the table. Ayan, so ito yung table or the critical values for the chi-square. Okay, iba yung critical value table ng Pearson R, iba yung critical values or iba yung table ng chi-square. Ayan. So again, ano yung ating degrees of freedom? That is 4, 'di ba? 4. So hahanapin natin yung critical value ng 4. Okay. No, nasaan ba yung 4? So, ayan yung 4. Ayan. Napasama lang to. Pero ito yung 4. And then, ano ba yung margin of error na ginamit natin or yung level of significance? 'Di ba? 0.05. Ayan, 0.05 yung ginamit natin. Therefore, our critical value will be 9.488. So, yan yung critical value na i-compare natin doon sa ating computed value. So, again, yung computed value that is already given on the problem. Okay? So, again, tandaan natin, yung ating critical value ay 9.488. Ayan. So, ito na siya. Let's go to the rule number 5. We have to write the specific decision rule. Okay? 14.32, it is the computed value. And 9.488 is the critical value. Yung critical value, nakuha natin siya sa table based doon sa degrees of freedom na nakuha natin. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, 14.32 is greater than 9.488. So, ano ibig sabihin nito? Mas mataas, mas malaki yung ating computed value. Okay? And then, ano yung ating hypothesis? So, yung dalawang hypothesis natin ay, tingnan natin, ito. Yung nasa box na yellow. Okay? Para malaman natin kung alin yung i-reject natin and alin yung i-accept natin. So, for the null hypothesis, there are no significant differences among the mathematical skills of grade 12 students based on their ages. Okay? And then for the alternative hypothesis, there are significant differences among the mathematical skills of grade 12 students based on their ages. Okay, so ito yung ating mga hypothesis. Now, tingnan natin kung alin yung re-reject natin. So, alin din yung i-accept natin. So, ano ba yung rule? So, if the computed value is greater than the critical value, we have to reject the null hypothesis. Okay. Paano malalaman? Tingnan ulit natin to. So, ibig sabihin, ito ang ating computed value. Ito ang ating critical value. So, 14.32 is greater than 9.488. Greater than daw. So, ibig sabihin, Ito yung rule, if the computed value is greater than critical value, we have to reject again yung null hypothesis. Ibig sabihin, cross na tayo dito sa null hypothesis. So, meaning to say, yung result ng ating research is ganito. There are significant differences among the mathematical skills of grade 12 students based on their ages. Kasi, nireject na nga natin yung ating null hypothesis. Okay? But then, kapag naman mas malaki yung ating critical value sa computed value, baliktad lang din. So, ito yung i-reject natin, yung alternative. And then, i-accept natin yung null hypothesis. So, ganun lang po. So, don't be confused with the critical value. Ayan, yung critical value, again, makikita siya. Ayan, so yun lang. Makikita siya, yung critical value, makikita natin siya kapag nakuha na natin yung degrees of freedom. And then,